RT is in Chicago sitting down with longtime activist, former leader of the Weather Underground radical group that operated back in the 60s and 70s, and now clinical law professor at Northwestern University and director of the Children and Family Justice Center, Bernardine Dohrn. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Pleasure. The form that revolution and insurgency takes is constantly changing. We just saw the Mideast uprisings. Who could have imagined that before it happened?
When those events broke out, a lot of people in the United States were sort of fearful that the same could happen here on that kind of scale. Do you think that's possible?
Of course it's possible. You know, we've grown up in an era of American exceptionalism, right? The last 70 years, where the United States somehow isn't bound by the other laws of history. But of course we are bound by the laws of history.
In the 1960s, Bernardine Dohrn was one of the leaders of the violent radical group known as the Weathermen. On December 3, 1980, in Chicago, Bernardine Dohrn surrendered after 10 years in hiding. With her was another weatherman, Bill Ayers, with whom she had been living. They held a press conference and stated their continued commitment to radical change.
Resistance by every means necessary is happening and will continue to happen within the United States as well as around the world. And I remain committed to the struggle ahead.
Now, Senator Obama has been bashed for his association with William Ayers. Ayers has served on a board with Senator Obama in Chicago, and Ayers held an organizational meeting in his home for Senator Obama's state Senate campaign in 1995. Why exactly was Senator Obama being slammed? Well, it's because Ayers, who is now a Chicago professor, was a member of the radical group, the Weather Underground. But just what is the Weather Underground? Our next guest says the group tried to kill him and his family. John Murtaugh, a lawyer and an adjunct professor of public policy at the Fordham University College of Liberal Studies, joins us in New York. Welcome, John.
Good evening, Greta.
John, take me back to 1970. How old were you then?
I was 9, about 6 months older than the senator.
What was your father's occupation?
My dad at the time was a New York State judge, trial court judge here in Manhattan.
All right, so now those two questions are very relevant. So tell us now, what happened back in February of 1970?
At the time, Greta, my father was the trial judge on a case called the Panther 21. A number of members of the Black Panther Party on trial for allegedly plotting to bomb a number of landmarks and department stores here in New York City. February 21st, 1970, in the midst of that trial at about 4:30 in the morning, William Ayers' Weather Underground frankly launched an attack on about 4 different sites here in New York. They attacked 2 military recruiting installations in Brooklyn. They attacked a police installation in Lower Manhattan, and then they attacked my family home with us sleeping in our beds with 3 separate bombs.
Now, I'm going to ask you a second why you think it was Weather Underground, because the trial was the Panther 21. But first, I want to have you just describe a little bit more your sound asleep and what happened.
I was sound asleep in bed. Our whole family was sound asleep. 2 bombs were detonated in the front of the house, the front door and an enclosed porch. The third was actually what today, 38 years later, ironically, we call a car bomb. They placed an explosive device under the gas tank of the family car near the back door in a garage. First thing I remember is waking up, no doubt from the sound, my mother coming into the room, pulling me out of bed. I remember standing in the kitchen with my parents, with my family. We could see flames through the window. But quite frankly, my parents didn't know whether to leave the house or not because you didn't know what was outside. You're stuck in a burning house, but you're not sure whether it's safe to leave.
I take it those were sort of the old days when people actually had their addresses in phone books and stuff like that, even judges, right?
I guess so.
All right, now, you think it's the Weather Underground, but the Panther 21 was the trial your father was actually trying at the time. How do you connect those two?
Quite simply because over the years, that's exactly who's been credited with the attack. Bernardine Dohrn, Bill Ayers' wife, months later took credit for the firebombing of our house. She took credit for a number of bombings in New York and threatened additional bombings to come. Every history of the Weather Underground that's been written since that time documents the fact that the assault on our home and our family, the attempt on our life, was by the Weather Underground.
Now, I take it changed your life.
Well, clearly, at the age of 9, for anybody to experience that sort of thing, it's a life-changing experience. The Weather Underground continued its attacks, as you documented, on the Pentagon, on the Capitol, on any number of buildings. Indeed, about a month after the attack on my family, they blew themselves up in a bomb-making factory in Greenwich Village as they were preparing bombs to attack a military installation at Fort Dix, New Jersey.
And at that time, I think, weren't there 3 Weather Underground who actually died in that Greenwich Village bomb incident?
I believe that's right. They were packing dynamite and nails to create shrapnel into bombs when it exploded as they prepared the weapons.
I brought up the subject of what's going to happen after we take over the government. You know, we become responsible then for administrating, 250 million people. And there was no answers. No one had given any thought to economics. How are you going to clothe and feed these people? The only thing that I could get was that they expected that the Cubans and the North Vietnamese and the Chinese and the Russians would all want to occupy different portions of the United States. They also believed that their immediate responsibility would be to protect against what they called the counter-revolution. And they felt that this counter-revolution could best be guarded against by creating and establishing re-education centers in the Southwest, where we would take all the people who needed to be re-educated into the new way of thinking and teach them how things were going to be. I ask, well, what is going to happen to those people that we can't re-educate, that are die-hard capitalists? And the reply was that they'd have to be eliminated. And when I pursued this further, they estimated that they would have to eliminate 25 million people in these re-education centers. And when I say eliminate, I mean kill. 25 million people. I want you to imagine sitting in a room with 25 people, most of which have graduate degrees from Columbia and other well-known educational centers, and hear them figuring out the logistics for the elimination of 25 million people. And they were dead serious.
John Gibson here now with his take. Ron and Heather, ever heard of a guy named Rashid Khalidi? Not a household name, but Khalidi is a friend of Barack Obama, a professor of Arab studies at Columbia University. Back when Bill Ayers was bombing the Pentagon and Barack Obama was only 8 years old, Khalidi was in Beirut, where, according to the LA Times, he acted as a spokesman for Yasser Arafat's PLO. Later in the 90s, when Obama was starting his political career, Khalidi advised the Palestinian delegation during peace negotiations. Again, according to the LA Times, when Khalidi was a professor in Chicago, Barack and Michelle Obama were frequent dinner guests at the Khalidi home. But recently, when Obama was asked about Khalidi before an audience of American supporters of Israel, he said this.
And I do know him, and I have had conversations. He is not one of my advisors. He's not one of my foreign policy people. His kids went to the lab school where my kids go as well.
Sounds like the way you described Pentagon bomber Bill Ayers, quote, a guy I know in the neighborhood. Well, we know more than that. We know that Obama and Ayers were partners on a foundation board that gave away about $50 million over half a dozen years, and that Obama's political career was launched at a fundraiser in Ayers' living room. Now we have Khalidi, the PLO representative, who was also someone, quote, I do know. But it was more than friendly dinners. Over a period of time when Obama ran the Woods Fund, he approved somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 grand to Khalidi's Arab American Action Network. And in 2000, Khalidi and his wife hosted a fundraiser for Obama. Notice a pattern, close involvement with people like Ayers and Khalidi, both socially and financially. And when asked about these close associations, they suddenly become someone I know in the neighborhood or someone whose kids go to my kids' school. Why is Obama covering up his friendship, and why is the media working so hard to ignore Obama's friends? Heather?
All right, John Gibson.